talk by Ariel, who will tell us about his exciting work looking at how deep models, whether deep models can really tell us something about the brain and not just estimating behavior. Ariel did his master's and PhD at the Hebrew University in cognitive sciences program, followed by a postdoc with Willie Castle in Princeton, and since 2022, he's been here at the University of Psychology and
Cognitive and Business School.
Cognitive and Business School, right. Okay, great, looking forward to it.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the introduction. Thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you very much for your attendance. This presentation is slightly different than what I had in mind in the beginning, because on Sunday I had the pleasure of hearing in the seminar Professor Goldstein criticizing my work, some of my work. So I will try to do this hybrid representation where I will address some of the points. I will present some of the new results that I wanted to present, and hopefully it will be fine. Okay, so I will jump to it. I'm guessing that by now everybody knows what ChatGPT is, or what autoregressive language, what autoregressive deep language model is, right? You all play with it, something that you feed text into, and you get text from. You input text, and you get a text as output, and there is somewhere in the middle some neural net that does something. Okay? So, very simple, and you all know it mimics, as I said, it mimics behavior quite well. Reasonably well, better than other things that we have so far. Okay? So, we have words. We represent them as vectors, okay? These vectors we call embeddings. We feed it to a neural net that does series of nonlinear computations. From this last hidden layer, this last hidden representation, we make the model makes a prediction as to what the next word should be. And given the actual world, the model, so here the model, for example, predicted the word ocean, giving the actual world, in the learning process, the model fine-tunes its weight to make better predictions. This is done on huge corpuses, basically on the internet, hundreds of billions of words. Now it's not actually words, it's tokens. It's like the basic units that the model is looking at. Right? So doing this very simple objective of learning how to predict the next word given its context, in this case given its past context, the models were able to learn remarkable stuff that were considered as emergent property. Okay? We didn't think that this simple objective will lead to such a remarkable model. For future terminology, I will call, so for example, this last layer, I call it a contextual embedding. What do I mean by that? This is a representation of the next word, which is fully dependent on its past context. Context. Okay, so this is the vectorial representation of the word. And what you've all done, what you've all played with, and here is an example of what I did a few months ago. I fed a title from the New York Times, or not New York Times this time, into not ChatGPT, into GPT-2, and let's see what it completed. So given the context, Elon Musk has dissolved Twitter's board of directors, cementing his control over the social media platform. This is what I fed to the model. Now the model is generating word by word its output. The move was announced in a series of tweets by the billionaire Ted Schmohul, who is the platform's largest shareholder. He tweeted, the Twitter board is dissolved. All members are now directors of Twitter. I am the CEO of Twitter. Which kind of sounds like something, not Trump, sorry. Kind of sounds like something Musk would have said, right? it captures some of the style. Now, when we look at it, right, so we generated language, and I want to show that, to know that what clearly grammatically fully possible, it's grammatically sound, it is semantically sound. It even uses, I know that pragmatics is not the exact word here, but it uses the way that we use language, written language, for example, putting quotation marks between a citation, be tweeted and then understand that it comes to citation, even give this like hyperlink to the continuous of the article, right? I mean, it realizes that it comes from something that you can read more and to see the entire article. Now, this is of course completely fake, but just by learning the next word prediction, and as Professor Bujansky said, the model understood something about the reality, the underlying reality of the word.
I didn't say that. I was quoting.
You were quoting Ilya Satskover. You are right. And this is very surprising. This very simple objective, which I would say is biologically plausible, making a prediction regarding the next state of the world, getting the output from the world, and then optimizing the prediction moving forward. It's something that we can imagine, or a human brain is doing. And as it turns out, it is.
Can I ask a question
Sure.
about the pragmatic aspect of it? Because I want to understand what this text says. So the only construal that makes sense of it is one in which, because it says the Twitter board is dissolved. Now the question is all members. What members are we talking about? Obviously, we're not talking about the members of the board.
No.
Because this is this would be contradictory.
All
right?
members of Twitter users.
So that's the point. The point is that the only non-contradictory construal that we have to impose on it is one in which we say that when one talks about members, we mean not the members that had just been mentioned, but rather something else.
Yes.
It's important to note that there's something special about this text. So it is pragmatically sound, but under a very specific interpretation that needs to be pointed out. And one question you might want to ask is, who is the object that understood it other than you and me?
So I think that the question of understanding is a very good question, and I would like to discuss it. In fact, I wrote a paper about it, about how I think understanding actually conflates the notion of consciousness with some behavior. I will not get into it now, but I would love to discuss it later. Okay, but I'm sure that we'll have a lot of discussion during this talk. Another thing that it learned is world knowledge. Okay, you can see knowledge that Musk is a billionaire, a tech mogul. So really, this simple objective can give rise to something that looks or feels cognitive. Now, and here I'm trying to merge my motivation of continuing Professor Bojansky's my reply to the seminar on Sunday and what I wanted to discuss. So there are 2 points that I want to make regarding these language models and what we can learn them. What is I am? In addition to be amazed by their ability to mimic behavior. And the first thing that I want to say, it has nothing to do with behavior. It has to do with our ability to use deep language models to understand or to model how the brain codes language, not how it generates a language, which is given, related, but it's a different construct. First, I want to say that that deep language models codes language in somewhat similar way, not identical, but very similar. Then I'm going to say that I still think that we can learn something about the way that the brain generates language by looking at these deep language models. But these are 2 different claims. The data that I'm going to use comes from ECOG patients. ECOG patients are patients who have very severe epilepsy. and in order to, it is immune to drugs, and in order to give them treatment, they need to go into a first surgery where they open part of their skull, put the electrode on the brain, and then stay for a week in the hospital where the brain activity and seizures are recorded. And then in the second surgery, the focus of the seizure is removed to some extent. Okay, in this period of time, we can have experiments if they want. And this gives us very high quality signal, as the signal doesn't need to travel through the skull. Okay, so I'm going to describe two data sets. In the first data set, we played them a podcast, a very fun podcast about a photographer that monkeys the camera. And the second data set where we took free recording of the room, of course with their consent, and we recorded all of the conversations, 24/7 recording of roughly 5 days. Okay, so this is the second data set. We have 4 patients from this data set, 9 patients in this data set. This is of course much larger data set. We have almost 500,000 words in this data set. Okay. And what is the structure of all of the analysis that I'm going to do? I'm going to display. So we have a neural signal, okay? Whether it is taken from the brain while they were listening to a podcast, or whether it was taken from the one having a conversation in the hospital. Okay, we have the audio aligned with the signal. We have a transcript of the speech aligned with the audio. We know if it was taken from we labeled it. If it is during comprehension where the patient are listening to speech, or when it is production, when they are generating speech. Okay? Now the question, can we find ways that teach us something about the way the brain codes these words? Okay? So we are going to compare a few vectorial representations that are developed in computational linguistics and deep learning literature.
Question?
Yes.
So the patients were also instructed to
No.
say something?
No, they're in the hospital.
So everything is just
Yes.
part of this data set?
Yes, they're in the hospital. We record everything. They don't leave the room because they have to on the building, but they are awake and they interact with the environment.
Questions?
Yes.
What was the echo exactly happened?
Sorry?
Over which areas was the echo?
I will. So it is mostly on the left hemisphere. What I'm going to show is mostly on the left hemisphere, not on the visual cortex, because nobody will ever do a surgery there. Parietal lobe, frontal lobe, basically the hemispheric cortex, the left cortex without the occipital. Now, what we are doing is we are comparing different ways of representing language and their ability to predict the neural signal in this environment. Okay? So here I show word embedding, classical word embedding, glove embedding, which are static representation of the language. These are non-contextual. Imagine that you have a dictionary, and for each word you have a vector. And this vector captures, to some extent, the average meaning of a word, regardless of the context. Okay? There is the representation I am rooting for here, which is induced by the GPT-T, by the deep GPT-2, the deep language model. We saw the last layer. You all remember what is the contextual embedding? Induced by the last layer of the GPT-2. I will also show you later a multimodal deep learning model, which takes audio and text. So I will discuss it later. But I want to say we can take any representation that people can offer and think about based on whatever theory they like, and we can compare the ability to predict the brain in this natural setup. The analysis I'm going to describe called encoding. Encoding is analysis where I take the representation, let's say I have the data set, I split it to 90% training, 10% test. I build a linear model to predict I build a linear model that takes as input the embedding, whichever I want, of a word, and I'm predicting the signal at a specific level. Okay, so if my representation is 50 dimensional, for each leg relative to the word onset, I'm building a model that predicts the neural signal of the word. Okay? I'm building it for 90% of the data and then testing it on 10% of the data. What do I mean by testing it? I'm implementing this a sequence of models, right? Linear models. For each leg I have a model. I predict the neural signal, and then I'm looking at the correlation between my predicted signal and the actual signal that the model was not aware of, was not exposed of during the training. Okay? So this will give me a fit. How well can I predict the neural signal with a linear model by using the embedding that I chose? And this is also the result that Professor Gorjansky cited. What we can see is the following. If we take the static embedding graph here in blue, okay, so we can really see that we have a significant correlation. Each peak, the correlation peaks at 300 milliseconds, which is on average how much takes time to pronounce a word. We can also see, very interestingly, that we have significant correlations before word onset, and this is where I make the claim that we have some shared principle, because this is all what GPT does. GPT-2 is just trained on next word prediction, and it is enough to do all the amazing stuff that it does, and it induces the contextual embedding that it has. Here we see that the brain spontaneously, I didn't ask the patients to make predictions, they are just listening, free listening to the podcast. You can see that we have prediction, what I call prediction. But, not more importantly, but perhaps what is this paper mostly cited, the context where it is mostly cited, is that we see much higher correlation with the contextual embedding. Okay? The embedding that the GPT-2 induced has much higher correlation with the brain than any other of the representation, static representation that we used. Okay? So this, I think, is the first evidence that I show you that we can learn something from this model that is not just about mimicking the behavior. It shows that we can code the way that the language is coded in the brain is similar, identical perhaps, to the way that GPT-2 does it, up to linear transformation. Okay. In a question? Yes.
So can you go back to the previous slide for a second?
Yes.
So it says on the top there 50 feet. What's
Yes.
that feet?
The dimensionality of the embedding. We made the embedding all to be the same dimensionality. Yeah.
Okay. So how did you do that?
PCA.
Okay. But is it possible though that because initially the embeddings are different dimensions, I assume, right?
Yes.
They're not the same model.
Yes.
So is it possible that process of dimensionality reduction, right? If you're starting out with different dimensional things, that process is actually what causes the differences between the static and contextual?
So perhaps it was possible. We tried it also with the original number of dimensionality. The results were the same. The reason it gives is 50. If you are talking about you, here you have more embeddings, here you have higher dimension, you can fit a better model. So we have to make it the same. But honestly, every way that we tried, whether it was a regularized regression, regional regression, most people in the literature gave the same result. It's not about the difference in the dimensionality. Yes.
So, my question has two halves. First, why do you call a 0.1 half correlation a similar representation? No, not really.
Okay.
It's significant, yeah. And the other thing is that we see that even word-to-vec has similarity, significant correlation. So that actually tells you that we are encoding the same space, so there is shared information, and so there is something, some correlation we should expect anyway. And yes, there is more correlation, but it says nothing about similarity of representations necessarily.
Okay, so let me answer. I usually get, I have a slide exactly for the first half, and I removed it now, hoping I will not, yeah, nothing changes. This is an average of 160 electrodes that was found significant. They get their peaks at different places. The variance is, you can see here actually, the peak, you can see here the correlation per each electrode. Some of them reach mostly in the superior tetragyrus and some in the inferior tetragyrus up to almost 0.5. So is 0.5 enough? 0.4 enough? So
For correlation, yes, but not for similarity.
So what is enough for similarity?
That's a good question.
So fine.
That's what you're claiming, and that's
No, so, I use the word similarity and correlation interchangeably. What I can say is that if we add different ways that I don't like to use of estimating the noise ceiling, so you can drive this correlation basically to any number that you want, which is what is used a lot of the time in the literature. Yeah, you cannot please everybody. If correlation is not similar, correlation is a measure of similarity. So this is the operational way I use to quantify the word similarity. To your second question, I perfectly agree with you that, as you said, GLAV or word-to-vec have something. I mean, we also see something, right? And what we did in order to think what's going on there is I took all the instances of the same unique word. Let's say monkey. Let's say I have it 5 times. Okay? So I have 5 different contextual embedding for it, right? And now I averaged these contextual embeddings. So now I got a static representation, right? A representation that is less sensitive to the context, because I use the same representation.
You have to mention the dual signal?
No, the embeddings.
Embedding is static.
No. There is the static embedding of GLAV, right? Now I'm taking the 5 instances of the different instances where monkey appeared, right? I have now 5 different contextual representations for monkey. I average them, and then I use it. And then what I got is something that looks very similar to GLAV. What? And not by definition. I mean, it's not by definition. GLAV was taken by doing a matrix factorization on a huge corpus, and here I'm taking the averaging, and I'm happy to say so. I was very afraid when I ran it, because what people could say, when I ran it, what I thought, perhaps doing something about the geometry of the contextual representation that I can better learn. But my point to you is, of course there is a relation between word-to-vec and GLAV to the contextual embedding. Because word-to-vec and GLAV are an average of all the contexts. And this is context specific. So you have here the ability to represent, to code the language in a way that is contextual. And it seems that the brain also does it with this specific representation. Okay.
Yeah, sure. How far back can you go before the contextual correlation?
So, a great question, and I don't have it here as a sanity check. We always check, I don't know. Okay, there is something here that we need to remember. When you see a correlation, this is why when I said the prediction claim, I make it on the GLAV embedding, not on the GPT-2 embedding. Because in the GPT-2 embedding, you need to remember that in the contextual embedding, you have the information of the words in the past. Right? So when you see here a correlation, it might be a correlation with the actual word that you have here. Okay, so that being said, we always plot it like up to 10 or 20 seconds to make sure it goes to chance eventually. And we actually discovered some very interesting bugs this way. So we always make sure that we go to chance eventually, like somewhere. And to prove my point, here you cannot see it. Here it is slightly lower than here, but in the future it goes much quicker to chance. Okay, so this is the Nature Neuroscience paper, and the point is that there is another point there about pre-onset, about but the point is that you can see similarity the way I defined it between the representation and the brain. Now, in the second paper, I'm very happy to say it was recently accepted to Nature Communication. We did something, we doubled down on this claim of the similarity. So what we did is we did the following. We took one instance from each word. So now we have a data set where no word repeat. Okay? One instance for each word. And we did another thing, what we call brain embeddings. We took all the electrodes in the inferior frontal gyrus, and we made this, the brain embedding, the way that the brain represents the world. And again, we learned a linear mapping between the contextual embedding, where now we have only one instance, to the brain embedding. And now, when we test the encoding, we test it on words it never seen. Okay? Not instances it never seen. So here I will have, in the training, important, law, and judge, and in the test set I will have with, copyright, and something else. Okay? And what we can see is that we are actually able to predict the word in the test set, words that were never seen before. We do it better than the nearest word from the training. So let's say somebody say, look, you predicted the word for a monkey, but in the training you had the word for gorilla. So we expect the representation to be the same. No. The model, based on the contextual embedding, predicts the representation of the new words, unseen words, better than the near neighbor. Okay, and we see it patient by patient. Now this tells me that there is some similarity in the geometry, in the way that they are organized in this hyperspace of the contextual embedding and the brain embedding, the brain representation. Okay.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
I'm wondering about the degree of noise. That is
Me
there.
too.
Okay. So the usual way to test for noise is that you repeat 10 times the same experiment and then determine, because there are many factors in the noise, the placement of the electrodes, there are many factors that can basically cause a relatively wide range of noise.
Yeah.
So if did you do something like that? Like you repeated 10 times something, what was the baseline you compared it to? Because I have a hard time understanding 0.05 or 0.1. I have no idea why is that significant or not significant.
There is a philosophical issue here. My entire claim here is that the context matters.
No,
It's
it's
not
noise, my friend. It's not about philosophy.
But how
it's
can
noise.
okay.
Just measure noise.
But you
not
need
philosophy.
to offer a way to do it. So usually what people
What's
do.
the methodology?
So usually what people do, I could take the 5 times the word monkey appear, correlate, do exactly what you suggested. What is the problem? Is that in this way you treat the context of each word as noise. And it is not noise.
But
It
make
will
sure
give
the
me a lower
context takes
estimate.
I mean, isn't there a way to make the experiment repeatable, including the context?
To this day, I wasn't able to think about one. I did this way, but this way give an underestimation of it. If you do this way, when I do it, what you will get here, that the variance explained is more than 1. Then you will say, hey, how can variance explained will be more than 1? Correlation here will be higher than 1. Okay, so I don't know how to estimate the noise where the things that actually change and by definition change between the different repetitions are part of the effect. But I'm trying to, I will get it in a second. Not get it, I will have this problem in another place. Yes?
So in the second study that you just presented,
Yes.
It's based on the same data set?
Yes.
Okay, so now my question is, you selected specific electrodes because this is restricted to the inferior frontal gyrus.
Yes.
So how did you, I asked this question years ago, but how did you define the inferior frontal gyrus? It's not something that's easy to define.
Based on the comments made by the neurosurgeon of each patient.
So, okay, so in neurosurgery or where? When was this done? Because in neurosurgery, you can't do this. And this is inferior frontal gyrus, so this is topographic anatomy.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Okay. And you expected the neurosurgeon intraoperatively to be able to define the inferior frontal gyrus precisely.
So I don't
It's
know,
not a possibility. you see.
I can send you honestly the Excel files that we get prepare each patient with, perhaps not happening during the surgery. I said the neurosurgeon does it. I don't know if he does it during the surgery, but we get the notes for each patient, and each electrode has this like way he named them, and from this we decide. I'm not sure why it's there. I mean,
So it's not as if you did the selection
No.
of the electrodes at
No,
all.
no.
It's based on somebody's judgment, and it
But-
was
and
more
by the
than
way,
one
yes,
neurosurgeon.
and by the way, it's not even that I chose significant set of electrons.
No, I understand.
I took neuroanatomy, I made no
No.
selection.
You took the neurosurgeon's
Yes.
expert. Was there more than one neurosurgeon?
No.
So it's the same neurosurgeon,
It's the same neurosurgeon,
across
yes.
all 9 patients?
Yes. For the podcast, yes. Okay. Okay, so here again, I'm making this claim that we can learn about the way that language is coded by these deep language models, not by just the behavior or generation. And I think this is a very harsh test, to test it on unseen words. Okay.
Wait,
Yes.
You showed another group of, I guess, no. Yeah, there was here something else.
Wait, this.
This one.
Yes, we took an adjacent area as a control, right? We took an adjacent area as a control, not inferior frontal gyrus, which is associated with language representation, and we got nothing.
Okay, but in the previous one, not the zero-shot learning, there was something there?
Not in this.
Yeah.
So no, this is the one.
Here,
Some.
in the first slide, when you showed
Sorry.
was there something? Yeah.
Here. So here, so you see, we don't have much electron here for significant to begin with.
Oh, you don't have much electron.
No, not that much electron that turned out significant.
So even here, they don't show, even in this test.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Now I want to discuss something else. Making the same point about learning the way that the brain codes language. But now we do it on a much bigger data set, much more ecological, the conversation that we have during 24/7, and we use a very different model. It's not very different, but this model is, to me, it's more ecological. This is a audio to language model. It's called Whisper, developed by OpenAI, the same group that developed ChatGPT, GPT-4, etc. It has somewhat similar architecture. The model gets as input audio, the physics of the world, acoustics. Now there is a series of encoder, basically small neural nets that codes the speech, and it is being fed to something that is very similar to GPT, something that makes next word prediction. But the difference is that as an input, it also has the representation of the audio. And this is trained to do the next word prediction. In this case, the prediction is what do we have in this sound. Okay, so we have here 30 seconds of speech, of audio, and this model transcribes it. Okay? So I'm going back in the hierarchy of the perception. I'm starting now with the stimulus, with the physics of the world.
Okay. So there is no language, because I do see language.
Yes, so here you fit the audio, then the model starts to predict the language. It does it word by word, so it makes a prediction, and then it can use the prediction for its next prediction. This model is, in the ASR ability of this model is outstanding. It's comparable to human level transcribers. Okay, so what did we do? Pretty much the same logic. I'm defining now two types of embeddings. Speech embeddings, which is the last layer from this speech encoder. It takes it from the audio. And language embedding, which I'm taking from the last layer of this decoder. And as I said, the decoder is trained very like GPT-2, except the fact that it also gets input from the speech. And we now do, here you can see all the electrodes that we had for these 4 patients, left hemisphere. Here there are some stripes, so even go to the occipital Okay, and we do the same process of encoding, doing separately for speech embedding and language embedding, separately for comprehension and production. Now this is the first time we can look at production. Okay? So if we look at comprehension, basically we replicate, you can think about the results from the explicit experiment. We can see that the correlation here in the pre-central gyrus, somatomotor area and supratemporal gyrus, the correlation get up to 0.5. I've never seen correlations like this in encoding for speech, for sure not natural speech. But we can see something else that I find mostly interesting. In language area, like the IFG, we see higher correlations with the IFG, with the language embedding. In auditory area, we get higher correlations. What is the STG? Here. For example, with the speech embedding. So we do see evidence, but we also get a correlation with the other embedding. So on the one side, we do see the hierarchy that we were educated on. Here it's more about the audio, here it's more about the language. So yeah, we can see it. We have higher representation with the language embedding for the IFG and higher for the speech embedding in the STG. But we also see significant correlations with the other side of the embeddings. And this is not because information is being fed from the speech embedding to the language embedding, because in this specific analysis, I did a bolotomy, I dissected the two. Ablation, yeah, I disconnected it. Okay, so it's really about the speech representation induced by the acoustic signal and the language representation. I will tell you now, 1 second, if you fuse them, if I allow it to the natural course of whisper, we get better, we get higher correlation than the language embeddings. Yes?
Did you try with just the raw speech signal without doing anything that at all?
All the time. So this is something that we do in the very early stages of the pre-processing, where we cross-correlate the audio with the audio envelope of the signal, the audio envelope of the audio with the signal, just to get some first impression that we are aligned. Alignment is a huge issue in this data set. The correlation are between 0.05 to 0.1. We also partial analysis, we do partial analysis where we remove this information and then repeat the encoding. It accounts for very little of the effect, specifically in the IFG. Yeah, can you follow us up? Yes. What?
I still don't get, but maybe we're before it. I still don't get, what did we learn that we didn't know before about the brain that ChatGPT allowed us? I mean, so it's ChatGPT that predicts the new word. What so far is our new insights about the brain? I mean, we can replicate these regions of auditory oriented.
No. Now you have a specific way of code. This is the code of the language. It's not to say that I could say this is a more auditory and this is more language. Now we have a representation for each word. It's the code itself. It's not.
What can you say anything about this code? Do you understand? What is it that you understand now about this code? What can you say about how
it's
words?
fully statistical, that it's not symbolic, that I can say many things about the way the GPT-2 has this code. But the point is that, no, but it correlates with it highly, or 0.5 in some places. It's a specific model that correlates. If I will tell you, I have this magic box that speaks, right? You can touch it, and then I tell you, I'm looking inside this box. There are many ways to generate speech. You take n-grams. N-grams is a wonderful way to generate speech. Not wonderful, it's a way to generate speech. And I'm telling you, it's not about the way it behaves, it's the way it is represent language. The specific representation.
So how? So how is language represented that we didn't know before?
So what this will play, this model is doing a very simple objective of next word prediction, and the representation it induces is the representation that correlates with the brain. It's about having a specific code. This is
What is the specific? I mean,
This
obviously, we have, I mean, obviously, I can predict pretty reasonable your next word, so it means I must represent it.
Nobody's like your representation and my representation are linearly transformable. Who said so? And it's not from your brain, it's from text. Or here, in this case, audio to text. If I'm giving you now a text, and I tell you that this is what the patient heard, or I give you an audio, and this is how the patient heard, and I'm asking you, please tell me how the brain is going to look like. How would you do it?
I would have a similar sequence of thoughts. I don't know.
No, how would you do it?
How would I do it in what sense?
In the sense as a researcher, I'm giving you the stimulus that the patient was heard, and I'm trying to predict how his brain is going, their brain is going to look. You need to know the code of how it is coded in the brain. And this is what I'm suggesting here, an evidence code. But perhaps we can continue that, but I'm not sure that we
Ask
will.
better, because I don't understand from you how it's coded in the brain.
It's the same representation, my point is. I'm taking the representation from the language model, or in this case, the multimodal model, and I'm predicting the brain. But let's discuss it later. I will skip some things that I find very interesting. For example, a question, a small question, I thought about skipping the next slide, but I'll try to use it to answer the question. How do we code, or is a relation between the way we code our own voice when I hear myself speaking and the way that I hear your question? Is there a difference? I know what I'm going to say. Am I re-encoding it as I'm saying it or not? Is it a valid question? I find it very interesting. I was always fascinated by what happened when I start speaking, because often I have this feeling that I have my thoughts. When I start speaking, it goes somewhere else somehow. I hear that it's not what I thought it is. Okay? Here I can start to look at it. Because what I did here is I took the model we built for comprehension when the patient is listening to audio. And I use the same model during production when the patient is speaking. This is the green. And we can see something very interesting, I thought it was interesting, that it peaks, so you can see that when I train in production and test in production, I get this, these two peaks, one in the planning and one in the articulation perhaps. But when I use the comprehension model, I get peaks at similar places. There is something similar in the way that we hear and decipher the meaning of speech that we hear by somebody else and the way that we articulate it.
Well, it must be the case.
I didn't know it. I was there, and it doesn't. No, it's not have to be the case, because if your brain already knows what we're going to say, which I hope to some extent it does, why does it need to re-encode it?
No, somewhere in the brain, there must be a representation of what we are.
But it's the
And
same.
if we want to understand something, it means that there must be a similarity between things that we understand as the same. There must be a similarity in encoding. I cannot see how it can work otherwise.
So first of all,
Somewhere in the brain, you can say, I can tell you where.
I can tell you where, and I can tell you where, and I can.
This is what understanding
I
is.
can tell you where, and I can tell you where we hardly enunciate in the language area presentation. So it seems that we see it more in the Rajarus and Somato-motor, which are more low-level feature, but we don't see it in Rajarus. Okay. I really want to go to the place where I'm making the second claim about generation, because I think it's, yes.
What's the meaning of the very strong anti-correlations and negative values?
Where?
Yeah.
Here.
In many places. Long-lasting.
Yeah, no, so it's a very good question. We see negative correlations between production, it's production and comprehension. Okay, so And there is this theory, right, that we need to inhibit what we are going to say, because so we're not deaf by hearing. So it's one possible explanation. It's something that we definitely
Seconds before.
Yeah, something that we noticed, but looking at it, at this point, my suggestion is as good as yours.
I don't have it.
But it's something that we see a lot. My point is it's something that we see a lot in multiple places. Yes.
Go back again.
Yes.
This is the same word for both millimeter or
No, it cannot be.
average?
No. We build a model for comprehension, it's one set of codes. We test it on production, which is another set of codes, but we apply here the same model. Sorry, we apply different models to the same signal, right? The comprehension model and the production model for words during production.
So this is one example of one.
No, the correlation that we get is across all words. In order, okay. One more point. My last paper regarding the similarity in coding is looking at the sequence. GPT-2 getting the word and then does series of nonlinear transformation. Each layer induces a representation, not just the last layer. Actually, the last layer is not even the best one. The intermediate layer of the actual layer. But now what I'm going to compare is the temporal dynamic from the encoding from each of these embeddings and the brain. And I'm going to look at something very specific. I'm going to look at where each encoding peaks. So I'm doing encoding for the first layer, and then encoding for the second layer, and then encoding for the third layer. In the end, encoding for the 50th layer, 48th layer, so 48th layer. And then I'm going to normalize them just to see the order of the peaks in time in the brain. Okay? So basically, the point, you can see it here. The earlier the model, so this is like the color code, the earlier the model, the earlier the layer is, the earlier, let me put it that way. The deeper the model is, the later it peaks with the brain. So there is some similarity between and this is perhaps also trivial, but it's not trivial, that the series of nonlinear transformation that the GPT-2 is doing somehow map to the temporal dynamic of the brain. It didn't have to be the case. Here it's an average of like what we see here is the average of the inferior front, all the electrons in the IH. But we can see it for single electron as well, just for ease of representation.
And the input here is speech.
No, so here we are back to this experiment, to the text, to the podcast, because we have the text itself. Okay. So I hope I convinced some of you.
Question?
Yes.
So maybe I can a little bit, I think Martha was the one. So you find this phenomenological thing that time course seems to be similar to the layer, well, it is the layer, right?
Yes.
So the question is, what conclusion can you, so it's a phenomenological thing, so what's the conclusion? What can you learn from this about this comparison between the brain and this system? So
There is some similarity. It's not just about, look, but the question I rightfully asked, is there anything that mimicking behavior? And I showed you just 4 papers, all showing different aspects of similarity between the representation induced by these models and the representation induced by the brain.
but this doesn't lead you to a mechanistic understanding of any way.
I beg the difference. I can make the claim, or this supports the claim, that the brain is doing perhaps something similar of next forward prediction, and that propagate the error as stuff happens.
You don't have evidence for this.
I have supporting evidence. I don't know what is evidence in empirical science. What I can do, I can give supporting evidence. I can say, look, if the brain, this is not necessarily my claim, but to say I don't learn anything from it, it's a bit weird. Because I'm taking representation for a model you have no reason to believe would correlate to the brain. I'm showing the representation it induces correlate to the brain in going through fire hoops. You also see a correlation between the dynamic of how this code develops over time. You can say, look, it's not interpretable. Fine. Learn about, interpret the model. There is a huge, super interesting field about interpreting what this model is doing, machine learning interpretability. But the fact that it's not interpretable to us right now doesn't change the fact that it correlates with the brain. And perhaps it's up to us to see what we can learn about the dynamics of the model, because it's obviously correlated with the brain.
Can I ask you a quick question?
I want
What
to-
happens,
Yes.
what happens if you input noise or ungrammatical sentences or gibberish or a foreign language? What do you expect, A, the brain to do? You can measure the electrodes, and what do you expect your model?
Yeah, so foreign language, we try, this is
I
like
mean gibberish, something
Wait,
which is not a signal.
I would imagine that you don't see any correlation, because you don't have any consistent mapping between the values and the word. And you didn't do it.
This would be a way to measure the noise, right? If you input gibberish, you measure some signal, right? And then
But this I can give you now. Look at the correlation that you have here in the end, right? You have no information about the embedding, and the correlation there is 0. But for your other point, in foreign language, we did try, because we had patients who spoke, who had like Spanish speaker talking to them, they didn't know Spanish, and we didn't see any correlation when they heard Spanish. Okay, now I want to make a claim regarding the behavior, which obviously ChatGPT, or before ChatGPT, language models are not perfect in representing language. There are a series of phenomena that linguistics can formally show you that the model deviates from what the language is. And I want you to, I don't know if I have time for a short detour. I will have in mind 1 minute. I want half a minute of detour. When you play with ChatGPT, you are not playing with GPT-2. You are not playing with the model that what it was doing merely trained on expert prediction, which is what I did in my experiment so far. Okay? The way that large language models are trained is vastly different. They start with something like I showed you, like GPT-2. Then they specifically train using the same objective of expert prediction on specific tasks, reasoning, questions, semantic analysis, but specific data sets. Then they are doing reinforcement learning of having people interact with the model, getting feedback from the person, and updating the inner weights. Okay? So, and all of this is done because the generation is not complete. So, OpenAI, Google, Facebook, and Anthropic are all doing this to improve the generation, even though it's quite amazing now. But what I'm saying is that we can still learn something from it. Okay? There is structure in the unstructuredness. And for this, I'm going to look at the places where the model is right. And right means that the actual word was a probable word by the model, or wrong, or the actual word was not what was said, was not what GPT thought we were going to say. In the comprehension, we replicate the result that we had in the Nature Neuroscience paper. We see that before onset, the brain has a higher correlation with the probable word, because this is the statistic. This is what the brain has to use for the predictions. In the production, it flips. In the production, when we are saying something that is not statistical, not what the model wanted to say, we have higher correlations than the statistical. I hesitate to call it effort. The brain is making effort to say something that is not statistical. Now, I would say, what does it matter for the brain if it already knows what it's going to say? Why it would be different if it is, if for a language model, it's probable or improbable? It's the content that you want to say. I feel less hesitant to say that it is effort, because when I look at the action time of how long it takes to start to say this improbable word, it takes significantly higher. So it seems as if the statistical machine is part of what we do in comprehension, in production also. And when we want to deviate from it, we need to put some effort to it. So it gives us some clue about what happened during production. Even though even though the production itself might be not perfect, which of course it's not perfect.
Oh, yeah.
I will skip this.
Do you have this division for the division you had where you use production use comprehension for production versus production for production? Because
No.
then I wouldn't expect the second peak for the comprehension.
Right. Didn't do it, and we didn't do it. I will skip my last slide, which will show another deviation from between the models. I think that's it. I said mostly what I wanted to say. We can find one question if we have. And that's it. Thank you very much. Yes.
I want to pick up on what you told Merav.
Yes.
You're trying to understand what is it about the language and the human representation that you actually learn. So you're telling us that a model that's generated with statistical only information, next word prediction, is correlated with what is the representation in the brain, and that's fine. And it's not trivial, I agree with you. Now the question is, you actually had this leap when you told Merav that it's non-symbolic. So are you going to argue that from this that there is evidence that the representation is non-symbolic?
If you will give me, and this is like for the last 5 years I'm thinking about, if there is an experiment, I'm not sure that there is an experiment that can differentiate these two hypotheses. I'm not sure that there is one. I think perhaps the zero-shot experiment perhaps give you some clue. Because if what you have is just symbols, so you know how to map the symbol of banana to the brain, and you know how to map the symbol of monkey to the brain, it shouldn't tell you how to map the symbol of tree to the brain. So if it was just symbolic, I don't see how this would work. I didn't. If I thought it will be the definite experiment between the two, like between symbolic and associative representation, I would start with that. I don't think that it's that, but I think that this is the closest that I think that can be tilting a bit the weight to the non-symbolic representation, and it doesn't mean that there is no symbolic representation. It doesn't mean so. It means that to some extent, it makes this puts the Any more? Yes.
So if I give you another model, I don't know how it was created, not transformers, not quantum
yes.
computing, but it does very well on next word prediction.
Yes.
Comparatively well as a ChatGPT. Yes. Wouldn't you expect that it also be correlated? For instance, it's a matter of just being able to predict the word and not the mechanism or
if I don't know how it was trained?
You don't know anything. You just
no,
know that
not necessarily.
it's really good at predicting the next word.
I would do no guess. I would do no guess.
According to your test, it should have high correlations, but it's predicting well the next.
No, this specific model trained in the next word prediction, which I think is a reasonable to think about what the brain can do, induces a representation that correlates with the brain. It might be that your beautiful machine will have higher correlations, but your guess is as good as mine.
No, my point is the main claim here is that the brain has information about the next word.
Yes.
It's predicting the next word, but everything about the process, layers, you can't really say anything. You just know that the penultimate layer has a good representation of the next word.
But look, there are some stuff missing in your way of describing the experiment. Does your experiment induces vectorial representation that they can use to predict the brain? If you just give me words, yes, this is let's think about it. If you just give me words and I give the AI from the outside, give them a symbolic representation like one hot encoding, no meaning, no context of nothing, like you said, just tokens. And I'm giving them this non-informative representation, you will get this black line. You will get this black line because it's the fact that the same word appeared twice.
I'm trying to understand if it says something about the brain or something about the structure of the language.
So
because it doesn't matter how it was learned, what the structure is.
No, it's very important. It says that there is structure to the language, that our brain picked on this language, or picked on the same representation. It says that it does it in a similar way, in the sense that it's enough to do a linear correlation between the representation it induces and the representation the brain induces. It says that there is a similarity between the sequence of, it's a sequence, we don't have one representation of the world. We process it over time. So we have a correlation between the way this model processes over time and the way that the brain comprehends it over time. But yes, this model doesn't feel like the stuff that we like as a scientist, like we are all physicists at heart. We want all four formulas that will explain Maxwell to explain all of magnetism, electromagnetism. We want one formula to explain special relativity. It's not, we need to differentiate between the fact that it's not interpretable now and the fact that it correlates and says something about the brain.
That was not the question. The question was, are you studying the brain or are you studying language?
I don't know, for me, if I'm looking at correlation with the brain and I see temporal dynamic, so in the brain, and I see that in production, we go back to, we're another one. And I feel that this representation allows me to track the fact that during production, I see before onset, I see a peak in the IFG, and then in the SPG, but then in comprehension, it flips, which is perhaps what you'd expect. But this specific code of language helps you to track it in the brain. So it depends on what you define exploring the brain. To me, to find the code that correlates with the brain is exploring the brain. Not exploring GPT. Sure. Thank you very much.